Anna, you were talking about how you looked up some articles on anxiety, and neither the articles or videos were super helpful in giving advice about anxiety.
Right. It was one of those times when I was actively struggling with it, and I don't think I was a mid panic attack, but I was definitely very high stress, very high anxiety, and I was struggling with coping. And so I was looking
Okay.
up articles. I literally just Googled, how do I help myself with my anxiety? And the articles were so dumb. They were not helpful at all. I know dumb's not a nice thing to say, but they really were unhelpful. It was just, remember that other people have it worse. Remember that you have friends. Remember that, life's not so bad. It's like, that does not help me when my heart rate is pounding in my ears.
Right. One of the
I'm
things
having
I
physical
do,
problems here.
right. One of the things I do, kind of regardless of the emotion we're dealing with, is kind of put it like on a scale of 1 to 10. With anxiety, there's different strategies at an 8, 9, 10 that work,
Okay.
and other strategies at a 1, 2, 3 that work. And maybe if you're at a 1 or a 2, remembering you have friends might work. But if you're at a 6, you're too anxious for it to work. So it sounds like they were talking about anxiety at a very low level, not a I'm in the middle of anxiety right now. So
That makes sense.
conceptually deal with anxiety, but not in a practical way how to deal with anxiety. Does that make sense?
Yeah, that makes sense. It also explains my annoyance because it's like that would have been helpful 10 steps ago. Just this
Right,
is not
right.
helpful
Yeah,
now.
yeah. Even though those things are true, not necessarily helpful. And I think that's a common response when people are asking for help with an issue, is people give them
Mm,
something that's true, and when that isn't actually the problem. And I use the example of like quitting smoking. I think just
mhm.
about everybody knows that smoking is bad for you, you know? So if someone's there like, "Oh, I really want to quit smoking," and someone says, "Yeah, yeah, yeah, smoking's bad for you." It's like, "Yes, but that doesn't help me in a practical way to quit smoking,
Right.
for you to continue to tell me it's bad for me." Or I think about when I play tennis, and my partner says, "Oh, hit the ball in." I said, "I know to hit the ball in.
It's
What are the practical steps to hit the ball in? That's what I need help with." You
right.
know?
It reminds me of the age old and not so funny joke that I still make more often than I should. When someone stubs their toe, it's like, "Oh, there's a table there."
Yeah, yeah, yeah. It's not funny to the person who just stubbed their toe on it, but
Mhm.
everybody thinks the person saying it thinks it. Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
So, yeah, those overarching things are important to know about anxiety, but when you're in the middle of anxiety, it's not only not helpful, but it's also redundant, because you probably
Mm,
do remember that you have friends and other people have it worse. And that's
yeah.
not helping your symptoms. Yeah. In general, if we think of anxiety like the fight, flight, freeze response, anything that counters or is opposite to that response is going to help. So if you think
Mm,
about the fight, I'm just going to call it the fight or flight response. If you think about the fight or flight response, like I'm running away from a grizzly bear, my heart rate increases, my breathing increases. So any way that you can counter that, that's why they say to deep breathe, which slows your
got it.
breathing and slows your heart rate. The other things that happen are when we're running away from a grizzly bear or fighting a grizzly bear, our big muscles move. So any way that you can kind of counter that by like stretching, or people naturally pace when they're anxious.
Mm,
So pacing when you're anxious,
yeah.
tightening up your muscles and then releasing them, doing 10 jumping jacks, kind of using your muscles like your brain says you're supposed to be using them. So
Mm-hmm.
if we're being chased by a grizzly bear, our brain is there like, use your big muscles to run or to hit. And we don't use those big muscles. Our brain says, what are you doing? You're supposed to be using those big muscles. And so
Well,
if
and
we do use
keeping,
them, go ahead.
yeah, just like keeping this in just what's happening physically within your body when you don't use your big muscles, all those extra chemicals and hormones that your body flushed you with because it's in
Yeah.
fight or flight mode don't get expended.
Yes, exactly.
Using your big muscles helps to burn off the adrenaline and the cortisol or whatever it is that makes you feel that urge. So that's a good
Right.
point too. I like that.
And the lactic acid, which a buildup is what makes us
There we go.
shake sometimes. So
Oh.
yeah, just kind of letting go of that.
Mm.
Physical responses. Another physical response of the fight or flight situation is something happening with our skin. And so some people get really hot, some people get really cold, some people, when they get scared, they get goosebumps. Other people, when they get scared, they flush. And sometimes it feels
Mm-hmm.
like some people feel kind of like a fuzziness, like their body doesn't exist, it's not real, or the edges of their body aren't real. And again, the practical reason for that is if that grizzly bear, strikes at us and gouges our skin off, we won't feel it as much if we don't feel our skin, if we don't feel our
Mm-hmm.
body. So a lot of times with anxiety, that sense of I'm not quite sure where I am with that in my own body.
Mm-hmm.
It has a very practical purpose. And then again, to counter that, wrap yourself up in a blanket, give yourself a hug, rub your arms, rub your legs to kind of remind yourself this is where the edges of my body are. And that's where the
Hmm.
term grounding comes from too, like stomping your feet on the ground just to remind yourself where the ground is. Because some people describe it as a sensation of floating when they're anxious, or I think they call it derealization or depersonalization, like they're not quite sure they're in their own body. And again,
Mm-hmm.
that's great if you were just, clawed by a grizzly bear to not be in your own body and feel that. But
It,
that's a
it it
super,
helps, yeah.
right? Yeah. And people also get freaked out by that a lot. So it is helpful to kind of know, not when you're in the midst of an anxiety attack or feeling anxious, but to kind of know that's a very normal response to not feel like you're in your own body. To feel that
Mm-hmm.
sense of confusion or disassociation is actually a good, healthy response.
Yeah.
So anything to counter that.
This is helpful. I like this.
So, yeah, real practical
And
things.
it
Go
is,
ahead.
and it's addressing because again, in the anxiety moment, yes, we're stuck in our own head, but really what we need is to control our body to
Yeah.
help pull ourselves out of that. Um, if that makes sense. At least that's how I feel when I'm struggling with that, when I'm in panic attack mode. And being able to have some control over something like your body does also help to bring you back out of whatever the funk is. Um, I think there's a security in having
Yeah.
some control
And
over
again,
something.
yes. And I would add that too. When we're being attacked by a grizzly bear, our brain does want us to be out of control or not in control, in the sense that it doesn't want our brain taking over and second guessing us. So
Mm-hmm.
it wants our body to just do what it's instinctually wants to do. So again, doing something that you're in control of would be countering that too, to say, no, 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 brain, you don't have to respond with instincts. We're going to respond very strategically, which
Mm-hmm.
is why one of the interventions people say works with panic attacks is to do something like name 5 things you see, name 4 things you hear, name 3 things you uh, smell, or whatever. And again, the whole purpose
Yeah.
of that is to bring us back to our brain is in charge rather than our instincts are in charge. So again, that's just countering a symptom of the
Okay.
fight or flight response. Yeah. Very weirdly, there are a couple of other things that just work, and we're not really sure why when people tend to have be in high anxiety or having a panic attack. One is to count out of order. Our brain, for some reason, can't. It can count 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, but to say numbers out of order, our brain can't do that and remain in panic mode.
Right.
So if there is someone around you who knows you have panic attacks or high anxiety, tell them this, because it's easier if they say, repeat after me, 57932, and then you say 57932. It's harder to think of it yourself because we all want to say 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, right? So it's hard to come up with random numbers. And also, we're in the middle of a panic attack, so it's harder to think in general. But that's one really fascinating thing that just happens to work. The other thing that happens to work is to go back from right brain to left brain, again, to kind of reconnect the halves of our brains to get it out of being super instinctual and go to thinking, still feeling that anxiety, but then going over to thinking and still feeling that anxiety, but then going back to thinking. And one way to do that is to use numbers and music. So if you count out of order, that's a little better. But even if you say 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and then go la 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 la, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, la 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 la, 4, 3, 2, 1. Mary had a little. Our brain can't do that and stay in anxiety. It just can't do those two functions at the same time. And again, that's something you probably want to think about before the anxiety attack. It's hard to remember in the middle of an anxiety attack. Go ahead. What were you going to say?
Silly funny that made me giggle is that, that means Mambo number 5 is a great song to sing when I'm anxious.
Oh, that's brilliant.
It's music and numbers. This is perfect.
I'm thinking of songs that have that, have numbers in them,
8675309.
That would probably work. I'm just thinking of like 1 is the loneliest number. Now you probably need more than one number.
That's a good one.
I'm sure there's a whole bunch out there, just numbers. I'm super curious about that, whether that works or not when they're combined in the same thing. So
I'll let you know.
hoping that you have a panic attack, Anna.
The other thought I had was counting actually is a coping skill that I came up with myself. I thought it up myself when I was in feeling like my anxiety was running high, and when I started doing it, I was counting backward, and then I started counting in jumps, like you would like when you're memorizing the multiplication table.
Wow.
So 1, 3, 5, 7, blah 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 blah, or 2, 4, 6, 8, whatever. So again, jumping around, but there was a method and a logic to it. So and numbers. There are musical practice things that you do when you're warming up your voice, if you're in a choir or anything, and it's you literally count your intervals, and it's 1 1 2 1 1 2 3 2 1 1 2 3 4 5 4 3 2 1, and so I could see utilizing those as another way of pulling your brain in both directions.
I love that idea, and you have a beautiful voice, by the way.
Oh, thank you.
It's like a clear bell lead voice. Yeah.
I don't project well enough to be a lead. I have to work very, very hard to get my voice to go out into the room.
So those are barbershop quartet terms that we're talking about.
Yep.
So I love those ideas. And again, especially since you're already familiar with it and you don't have to make it up or think up a new way to do one of those exercises you're already familiar with, or sing a song with numbers in it that you're already familiar with. but yeah, that going back and forth between to reconnect your logic half of your brain with your emotional half of your brain, it is the underlying reason behind that.
Another thing I noted when you were talking about that is forcing your brain to go back and forth and throwing randomness at it gives it a problem to solve. So instead of spiraling about whatever you're being anxious about, whatever your brain is fixated upon, your brain starts to untangle. Why are we throwing out 7, 5, 6, 2, 8, 7? Like it gives your brain something else to. It gives it a puzzle.
Yeah, yeah, I like that. After we're done talking, I'll kind of say the ones that kind of help when you're in super high anxiety and ones that help when you're in the middle, or that tend to. But mostly it's whatever works for you is what you want to do. For the random numbers, I would say, or the singing exercises, I would say that would work well for a higher level of anxiety. If you're not quite there yet, doing something like playing Sudokus. I can never say that. Sudoku.
Sudoku. Yeah.
Okay. Something that's easy enough that you can concentrate on it, but difficult enough that your brain has to concentrate. But again, that's not going to work when you're at a 7, 8, 9. It might work at a 4, 5 level on a scale of 1 to 10.
One of my unconscious coping mechanisms when I went to high school was I always brought a deck of cards with me and I played solitaire on my desk in the downtime. And I didn't
I think,
realize that I was doing it for anxiety. I just did it because I felt awkward.
yeah,
But I became known as the girl who always had cards.
that's
The principal was
interesting.
worried I was playing poker, but I wasn't. It was literally just to give myself something to do.
And it's again that sense of something's out of control and you're organizing it. So when you're playing
Yeah.
solitaire, you don't know what card's coming next. That represents the anxiety, and then you put it in its proper place, and that represents you getting control over that anxiety.
Yeah.
So a super easier way to connect the two brain halves, without the singing thing, is literally to tap yourself on your right shoulder and then at the same spot on your left shoulder, just in a
Mm.
rhythmic way, or on your
Yeah.
knee or wherever on your body, but just to kind of rhythmically tap right shoulder, left shoulder, right shoulder, left shoulder, or right knee, left knee, right knee, left knee. And that's again when your anxiety is too high to kind of process. What's that song again I'm supposed to sing? No.
Yeah.
Another real quick thing that works, that again they're not quite sure why, to hold your finger up about 1 to 2, about a foot away from your eyes, and stare at your finger for like 10 seconds, and then stare at something about 10 feet away, like usually the wall opposite wherever you're sitting in a room is about the right distance. So to stare at your finger, stare at the wall, stare back at your finger, stare at the wall. And again, when you're in really high anxiety, that tends to bring you
Mm.
down. And it's an easy one to do. You don't have to think a whole lot about it.
Yeah. That goes back into physical impairments that come along with anxiety. My eyes jump around a lot when I'm feeling anxious or awkward. So giving yourself a specific something to focus on, because focusing on that other person is way too awkward, or it's
For
too
sure.
scary, whatever it is.
Yeah.
But and no, I like that a lot. I'm liking about these tips and ideas is that they're dealing with the broad functionality of what anxiety is. Like
Uh-huh.
my ideas and your ideas are giving specific examples of how to utilize that, but it's
Yeah.
not telling you when you're anxious, do X, Y, Z and you'll be all better. That's not what we're saying at all.
Right.
And that's what I'm really loving about this conversation.
Yeah. It's just
So
kind of
there's
conceptually, yeah, kind of
yeah,
counter the symptom that is prominent for you. And actually, that said, I would add that I'd stick with either the symptom that's the biggest for you or the
mm,
symptom that's easiest to control for you. So if your
yeah,
breathing is like, then work on your breathing.
Mhm.
Or if it's just do the easiest thing, the thing that is easiest for you to remember, starting anywhere is going to be better than trying to figure out the, the proper technique.
Mhm. For
When you
sure.
were talking about your eyes darting, I think you just hit on why that works. Is if
Yeah.
we're walking through the woods afraid of a grizzly bear is going to jump out at us, our eyes are going to be darting everywhere, right? That's a fight or flight response. Like I have to be hyper
Mhm.
alert. And if we're staring at things in a very controlled way, that again counters that hypervigilance of I have to be aware of every single thing at the exact same time.
Actually, interestingly enough, when you talk to people who've gone through military training and they've been taught to keep watch,
Uh-huh.
um, I read too many books. You're taught to make sure you move your eyes, check all your parameters, right? But you're taught to do it in a specific way, and I don't remember what the specific way was. I didn't. It's been a
Uh-huh.
while since I read that book,
Uh-huh.
but but you do it in a systematic manner so that you're not just darting around waiting for the shadows to jump at you. You're doing it in a methodical, logical way to be aware of your surroundings, which is what your job is. And when you're
Right.
in anxiety mode, that's what your job is. The specific example I can think of is when you're like to clear a house, you come in and you're taught to look in like this corner, that corner, that corner in a specific order.
That makes perfect sense because, again, it takes that eyes darting everywhere, which can lead to anxiety, and it gives you control over it. So it says, I do need
Yes.
to look everywhere, but my instincts aren't going to control that. My frontal cortex is going to control that exactly how I
Yeah.
do it. I was
Slight
just
side
taking
tangent,
notes.
but this could
Go ahead.
this could tying this into, like I say, military training, this could give people from the military with PTSD an accessible skill that they already have to use to help themselves.
Ah, yes. And again, if you use that as an analogy, you can use that
Mhm.
for your eyes, you can use that for a body scan, just go from your head to your feet, thinking about your symptomology. You can create your own sense of like working on breathing, then muscles, then uh,
Yeah.
thoughts or whatever, and just create that pattern. That's what they do, like in emergency rooms or in emergency situations, medical personnel. And I always forget the order of things, but it's like airway, heart, whatever. But it's like check this, check this, check this in a very
Mm.
repetitive, organized way, so you don't miss anything. Because the anxiety, yeah, is going to make you want to dart all over the place and say, what's going on over here on their body? What's going over here on their body? Let's check
Yeah.
A, then B, then C. Yeah, so basically with anxiety, things that work at low anxiety don't always work with medium anxiety, don't always work with high anxiety. At real high anxiety, I'd use one of those techniques that are more systematic or rigid, like
Mm.
staring at your fingers, staring at the wall, doing a vocal warm-up exercise, or singing, then counting, or doing, the multiplication tables or something like that, or grounding the outside of your body somehow, wrapping yourself in a blanket, stomping your feet. Kind
Yeah.
of it in the middle, it's thinking a little more specifically about what symptom is the biggest or what symptom is easiest to work on at that moment and just counter that symptom. So if you're hyperventilating, slow down your breathing. If
Mhm.
you're aching or pacing, work on doing some jumping jacks or stretching your muscles. If you're having that sense of derealization, then rub your arms and rub your legs and kind of counter that. And then at the really low level of anxiety, most of us kind of know already those things, like think that this won't last forever. However, whatever sayings are most helpful for you or whatever truths are most helpful for you at that low level, it might be helpful to let somebody in your life know what to say to you when you're anxious, or to
Yeah.
write them down so you remind yourselves of them when you feel that anxiety building.
Mhm.
Another piece of information that a lot of people don't know is that with most strong emotions, that they do come in waves. So there will be a peak and a lull, and the average is about 13 minutes for that just happens to be the average. So if you remind yourself, like within 20 minutes of a panic attack, there will at least be a lull where I can grab hold a little more effectively of these symptoms.
Mm.
Anxiety can last for as long as you want it to last, I guess, or as long as you feed it, but
Yeah.
every 20 minutes there's going to be at least a little lull, and probably before 20 minutes, but there is going to be a lull where it's just going to be easier to grab hold of. So if one of those techniques doesn't work, don't give up on it. Maybe try it 5 minutes later or 2 minutes
Mhm.
later, and see.
I think for me, it really is helpful just to have a wide variety of coping mechanisms to try at any given moment.
Uh-huh.
Um, and again, I'm not trying to boil it down to specific, do this one specific thing to make yourself feel better, or these 5 specific things, because sometimes, being wonderfully adaptive human beings, sometimes we short circuit our own coping skills. Um, and so, again, just dissecting it out, thinking of multiple ways to approach the same problem is definitely helpful.
You bring up a good point, and I don't think it's only that we're our human nature, but it's very specifically the nature of anxiety to come back. Our brain would
Yeah.
love, our survival brain would love for us to be anxious constantly.
Yeah.
So, yeah, any technique we try, our brain is going to go, "Oh shit, you're calming down. Don't calm down. Get anxious again."
Don't calm
Kind of.
down. What about that thing over there?
Yeah, what about the other grizzly bear? Or what about the crocodile right next to the grizzly bear? Which doesn't make
Right.
sense. Yeah, so it's don't if you don't feed into that, and if you just kind of say, "Oh yeah, that's anxiety doing its thing," and
Hmm.
then try a different technique or the same technique over again, it's not a
Yeah.
failure, so to speak. It's just kind of the nature of anxiety to go, "Are you really sure? Are you really, really sure the grizzly bear is gone?" Repetition isn't failure. It may be needed, or switching techniques doesn't mean the first technique didn't work. It just
Hmm.
means maybe you need a couple of techniques or 5 techniques.